freedom ring. Did free enterprise bring on the Depression of 1929? Did the imposition of socialistic and Marxist restrictions on the economy by Roosevelt cure the Depression? Is a depression impossible today because of government regulations? Well, these are questions to which most Americans would give the wrong answers. Free enterprise did not bring on the Depression of 1929 any more than it did the Panic of 1819. Both of these economic disasters were caused by government manipulation of money and finance. The socialistic nostrums imposed by Roosevelt not only did not cure the Depression, but made it worse. When Roosevelt took office in 1932, there were 6 million Americans unemployed. In 1935, after 3 years of Roosevelt's New Deal, which was, incidentally, masterminded by identified communists and Moscow-trained revolutionaries, there was 50% more unemployment than when the New Deal started. Well, what has this history to do with our situation today? It has a great deal to do, because the same economic climate of government-induced inflation existed before the Great Crash. The communist-conceived National Planning Association is today working toward another economic disaster for the United States. Mr. C.V. Myers, a highly respected Canadian analyst, says, quote, "I predict that within a relatively short time, the United States will have absolutely no gold, and dollars will be a drug on the market. The United States will be stripped of its power," unquote. In other words, America is bankrupt and in receivership. Next week, we will tell you the incredible story of how Russia is taking over American industry through purchase of American stock with your tax dollars. For documentation on the coming economic disaster, send 35 cents in coin to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Pickford, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. Can Americans rely on bankers, stockbrokers, and insurance men to give them a realistic appraisal of the economy? A recent survey conducted by American Opinion magazine revealed the appalling ignorance of these financial groups concerning our present economic crisis and its genesis. Most of the bankers queried did not understand the importance of gold, and they did not understand that government management of the economy makes a depression more likely, not less. Treasury officials continue to deny that we are in financial trouble, but as monetary expert Franz Pick says, quote, "Anyone who believes one word that the United States Treasury says is a fool," unquote. We are sure that the Treasury Department would not admit, for instance, that the Russians are growing fat on our gold, which was and is being given to them through foreign aid and trade programs conceived by known communists. In short, traders and fools are giving America over to the enemy. The situation has become so serious, reports Senator Olin Johnson, that Russia and her satellites are now buying up large segments of stock in American industry with our money. How far could we get in any future conflict if we found that Soviet Russia owned large segments of our key industries? Although most Americans don't, the communists, both here and abroad, understand the golden rule. He who has gold rules. Do you own any gold or silver coins? If you do, we suggest that you guard them carefully. They may mean survival in the economic crisis ahead. Next week we will tell you who the communist traders are who have given away the birthright of your children. For documentation on this economic Pearl Harbor, send 35 cents in coin to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Bickler, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. The economic disaster facing America was planned by communists and world government conspirators. Even back in 1929, when Herbert Hoover was predicting perpetual prosperity, the money manipulators were planning for economic collapse. These same plotters and their descendants are in control of your money and therefore your fate today. As the authoritative American Institute for Economic Research asks, quote, How does it happen that supposedly responsible men in positions of great public trust have permitted this nation to approach international insolvency, unquote? We would like to answer that question, and the answer is treason. The conspiracy to destroy the dollar and then the American economy started 50 years ago during the Wilson administration. The communization of the American economy took another great leap forward under the manipulation of President Roosevelt's advisor, Stuart Chase. Chase said, quote, "Why should the Russians have all the fun of remaking the world?" Unquote. Another man who did a great deal of Roosevelt's thinking for him was Rexford Guy Tugwell. Tugwell said that private business would have to be abolished. Unknown to most Americans, an identified communist agent, Louis Lorwin, was responsible for many of the economic monstrosities that have been inflicted upon the American people. He was greatly responsible for the Marshall Plan, which has nearly bankrupted us, and he conceived the President's Board of Economic Advisors. An identified communist agent, Harry Dexter White, literally ran the Treasury Department during World War II. Working with White were Communist William Ullman, Communist Harold Glasson, Communist Irving Kaplan, and Communist Victor Perlow. Is it any wonder that the balance of economic power is shifting rapidly from the United States to Soviet Russia? For documentation on the coming economic crisis, send 35 cents in coin to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Vickers, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember that what? Let freedom ring. Many Americans had hoped that Richard Nixon would reverse the socialist trends in our government and clean out the subversives and left-wing radicals. They are in for a disappointment. A vote for Nixon was a vote for the continuation of the Johnson-Humphrey welfare state and the appeasement of our communist enemies. As Nixon has vowed to strengthen the communist-conceived and communist-dominated UN, a vote for Nixon was also a vote for tearing up the Constitution and placing America under a communist-controlled UN world dictatorship. One of the first things Mr. Nixon did on being elected president was to pay his respects to UN Secretary General U Thant. As any retired military officer will tell you, when an officer arrives at a new base, he makes a courtesy call on his new commanding officer by a brief visit. Does Mr. Nixon consider U Thant to be his commanding officer? Now this question may sound ridiculous or incredible to those Americans who thought they were voting for a conservative who would resist communist expansion and defend the Constitution. But Mr. Nixon's appointment of Charles Woodruff Yost as U.S. ambassador to the UN should convince anyone that Nixon's allegiance is to the United Nations and not the United States. Mr. Yost is not a Republican, but a dedicated Humphrey Democrat. And as the French say about politics, the more it changes, the more it is the same. Next week, we will reveal to you the shocking pro-Soviet background of Nixon's man at the UN, Charles Woodruff Yost. For a detailed report on Mr. Yost, send 35 cents in coin to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Vickers, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo, and let freedom ring. Let Freedom Ring. This is an appeal to the good listeners of Let Freedom Ring, Chicago. Very shortly, a bill will be introduced into the Illinois House to repeal existing abortion laws and call for legalized abortion. Now, we have had the abortion law for over 100 years, and the overwhelming majority of people consider them proper and moral. But the usual small minority of atheists, communists, and liberal heretics devoted to revolution in church and nation hope to sneak it through the Illinois legislature, aided by a barrage of propaganda on radio, television, and in the press. These anti-religious conspirators would not dare to allow the preponderant Christian electorate to openly vote on this issue, hence they hope to fool our congressmen. They consider legalized abortion a necessary means to secure the free love and the free sex used to undermine the morality of our youth and ultimately our nation. These liberals of sex and sin decry racism, deplore genocide, but apparently condone murder. Since they are not conducive to a moral argument, let us consider a material point. A tiny, almost invisible seed is planted within the fertile soil. This seed, so indistinct from thousands of others, will produce a flower, blades of grass, vegetables, wheat, simply because it is life. How can a gardener, a farmer, put his fortune and faith in a tiny seed unless he knows that with fertility this will surely blossom with life? Destroy the seed and you destroy the life. It is as simple physically as it is morally. How much more serious when dealing with the human seed, the egg of life. We urge our listeners now to wire or write your Illinois congressman and others to vote no on new legalized abortion laws. Determine your representative. Address your letter to the State of Illinois House, Springfield, Illinois. We have won before. We will win again with your help. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom ring. Howard Bixler 3709 Irving Park, Road, Chicago 60618. Let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. Russia's space capability, contrary to what we are told in the press, is nil. This is reflected in their crude attempts to build a myth of Russian rocket and space technology. With the so-called soft landing on the moon, for instance, Russia's third-rate scientists became hopelessly tangled in their own lies. First they said that Luna 9 landed on the moon at 6:45 p.m., but the next day they said that Luna 9 began sending its signal from the surface of the moon at 3:31 p.m., which is 3 hours before it was supposed to have landed. Russia's space claims reached the height of absurdity with their comical photos of cosmonaut Leonov's walk in space, which was exposed by Science and Mechanics magazine and photographic experts as a made-in-Moscow hoax. The so-called spacewalk was staged in a tank of water, with actor Leonov suspended by wires. The photographs of Leonov are so poorly faked that a studio flashbulb can be seen reflected in his visor. And to add to the comic opera flavor, in one photograph, bubbles could actually be seen floating up from actor Leonov's helmet. Now, the Russian lie about their space achievements is so gigantic that it is hard not to believe them. But as Hitler's propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels said, if you tell a lie often enough, people will believe it. Not one neutral observer has ever witnessed the launch of a Russian rocket. Not one neutral observer has ever witnessed the recovery of a Russian space capsule. Not one authentic photograph of outer space has ever been released by the Russians. Now, industrially, Russia has barely emerged from the 19th century, yet the world is expected to believe her capable of launching and returning from space highly sophisticated space vehicles. For documentation on this incredible hoax with photographic proof of the Russian lie, send $1 to Soviet Missile Hoax, Box 1775, Sarasota, Florida, 33578. Let freedom ring. Howard Bixler 3709 Irving Park, Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom. Let freedom ring. Would you find it hard to believe that Capitol Records is putting out music that glorifies Soviet Russia? While we spend $70 billion yearly supposedly defending ourselves from Russia, the teenagers are listening to subversive trash by the Beatles and others. And perhaps it is no accident that Columbia Records is the home of Marxist minstrels, and the producer there, one John Hammond, is a notorious joiner of communist fronts. Perhaps it is no accident that our boys in Vietnam are often short of vital supplies and decent literature, but stacks of records by communist Pete Seeger are always available. Is it any wonder that a participant at a national convention of the communist W.E.B. Du Bois clubs reported that the Beatles are backed by the entertainment section of the Communist Party? While you, the parent, are told that you must sacrifice heavily to fight communism, your children are told by the Beatles and Capitol Records to go in the opposite direction. It is hard to believe that there is a communist plot to make America's teenagers patriotically anemic and more favorably disposed towards Soviet Russia than the United States. But listen to the International Music Bureau reporting in the magazine Soviet Music from Moscow over 30 years ago. Quote, "We can be successful in our efforts only if we know how to transplant our political slogans to the sphere of music." Unquote. Is it any wonder
that the communists have banned Beatle music in Russia and yet enthusiastically promote it in the United States? For documentation of this alarming subversion of our youth, send 35 cents in coin to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Bickler, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. A crime has been committed in Chicago, and that's not news. But when the crime occurs in the courts and not in the streets, that is news. A Chicago police officer has been convicted of murder. A Chicago police officer with 26 separate citations in just 2 years will be leaving his wife and family to face a sentence of 14 years because of a frame-up. What should be front-page news isn't mentioned. Naturally, the news media that promotes revolutionaries, pornographers, and criminals and constantly undermines all local police have been almost silent in regards to this case. On June 4th, 1968, a young hoodlum and gang chief was shot and killed after throwing a knife at Officer Richard Nuccio. Oh yes, the young man had a record and was violating probation at the time of the incident. And oh yes, the knife was found and identified, and Officer Nuccio had fellow officers as witnesses. But strangely enough, the prosecuting attorneys did not ask for their testimony. Now, after the Democratic Convention in April, the Chicago police were assailed by the communist-controlled peace groups, the Communist Accommodating American Civil Liberties Union, and the bleeding hearts of our commie-loving clerics of all faiths. The leftist press and news media demanded action against the police. Was a Chicago police officer, Richard Nuccio, to be made the first scapegoat, the frame-up being what will later be commonplace? You Chicagoans say you are proud of our police. Well, you should be. But if we allow this frame-up to stick, every officer is condemned to the same treatment. Now you can help, so let's go to work. Send 35 cents for particulars to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Bickler, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. With the outrageous appointment of James Farmer to the post of Assistant Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, Mr. Nixon seems to have moved deep into the liberal camp. Black extremist James Farmer organized the Congress of Racial Equality, commonly known as CORE. Senator James Eastland describes CORE as, quote, the War Department of those who sell hate and sow the seeds of discord. CORE, Mr. Eastland continues, is carrying on the fight for a Soviet America. In my judgment, he states, this group is an arm of the communist conspiracy, unquote. Farmer was also instrumental in organizing the communist-dominated Students for a Democratic Society, having been field secretary and vice president of the parent organization known as the League for Industrial Democracy. Now, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover has characterized the Students for a Democratic Society as a group largely controlled by people who openly profess communism. James Farmer has even gone so far as to praise the militant Deacons for Defense, which is an armed Negro group. Mr. Nixon thinks that this pro-communist agitator is qualified to look after your health, education, and welfare, appointing Mr. Farmer to a powerful position where he can not only promote revolution, but plan and finance it at government expense, makes about as much sense as putting Fidel Castro in charge of the Justice Department. For a good look at the shady past of James Farmer, send 35 cents in coin to Let Freedom Ring, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago, 60618. Howard Bickler, 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago. Remember the Pueblo and let freedom ring. Let freedom ring. This is an appeal to all men of good faith and American interest. In the last few days, there has been initiated a movement to censor telephone messages Now, obviously, there are in existence today some small fry groups that deliberately have been created to stir up dissension and hate. The fact that they come and go, appear and disappear, is proven testimony that they are strictly set up to destroy any legitimate organization. Let Freedom Ring is a nationally known group. After over 4 years, we have set up stations that communicate to hundreds of thousands of American citizens daily. Now, if a few hit or miss commie phone systems can challenge the right for Let Freedom Ring to exist, they have done their part in destroying a dedicated American educational tool. Even as the liberal anti-censors oppose any and all pornography, obscenity, or free love censorship, they are quick to take affront when documented facts by Let Freedom Ring are presented. Why? Is it not strange that after over 4 years, after United States senatorial investigation, after numerous press vilifications, that Let Freedom Ring is still ringing and growing stronger every day? Where are the numerous leftist charges of scandal, of lies, of threats to court action? Now they threaten, but they realize that a court suit will only bring the charges out into the open, and this is something they dare not face. Now you can help. Wire, or write, or phone Mayor Daley at City Hall. Let him know you protest this inquisition of Let Freedom Ring. If we are to be condemned, we demand a day in court. We ask this of our city council, and we ask it of you, fellow Americans. Remember the Pueblo and Let Freedom Ring, Howard Bickler 3709 Irving Park Road, Chicago 60618. Let Freedom Ring.